Cool, so I'm going to make this fairly relaxed, and I will sit here and walk through some stuff so I can actually show. Should be a bit more hands-on with what I'm showing rather than just talk through things. Some initial introduction to me. I work at SA2C. I use emacs, but I use it with currently at least with a package called spacemacs. I'm historically a Vim user. I've tried to use emacs several times over the past, so vanilla emacs as it were, and to limited success. I do quite like many things about Vim. Then I found spacemacs and I thought, wow, this is a great combination for a historic Vim user of the modal editing framework that we're used to with the extendability of emacs. So I'd quite like to introduce that quickly to see if maybe it's a good fit for some people here. Maybe there are people who use Vim who prefer if it were more emacsy in some ways. I want to have a little flavour of what this could be. There are a few along the way. There are a few pitfalls in the way that this doesn't behave quite in the way that maybe a Vim user would expect. So I'll try and highlight the ones that I came across and hopefully give you enough that you can experiment or at least have an idea. Okay, so this is spacemacs. Here's some links if you want to download it and have a play yourself. I'll make sure these slides are available somewhere. I quickly wanted to ask some questions. Do you have Vim users in the house? People who are all Vim users, Emacs users? One. Anything else? Okay.
I use Eclipse.
Eclipse, yeah.
With Wrapper, which
right.
is Emacs. Sorry, it gives you by keystrokes.
Yeah. That's very popular to have. I mean, so many editors these days have by keybindings, which is great for people who use them. So configuration, I guess people generally, if you're programmers, like to extend your editors and configure things. We like to do some configuration. Anyone written plugins for their editors, as it were? Anyone done any Vim scripting?
Yeah.
Yes. It's not nice, is it?
No.
It's really not nice. And actually, that's one of the points that was one of my sticking points with Vim, and one of the reasons that I really was finding it quite limiting is that I feel that Vim script isn't a particularly nice programming language. It's some kind of domain-specific configuration language, but it's limited in the extendability that you have. So hopefully that's one of the things we'll address. So quickly talk about Vim. I don't need to preach too much here. Some pros, just some things that I've pulled out of the sky. There are many more. These are all debated very extensively, so I won't spend too long on them, but briefly, it's very lightweight, it's portable, it's very heavily keyboard oriented, which people who like keyboard oriented stuff really love. It's very fast to start up, it's light, as I said. It's available on pretty much any machine you can throw a stick at least Linux ones. So if you're someone who works with lots of different Linux systems, it's a really great tool. And it's popular with people who like modal editing, not surprisingly. And as you pointed out, keybindings often are fairly available in different systems. The cons, as I mentioned, at least from my point of view, it's not very easy to extend, and integrating it with the operating system in a particularly meaningful way is tricky. But other than that, I really like Vim. I've used it for many years. I love it. Yes, cool.
So what do you mean by sort of hard to integrate with the shell?
Well, with the shell? Yeah. Well, generally, at least my use of Vim, I tend to jump in and out or send commands.
Okay.
Right? I don't have, you've used Emacs a little bit, I think.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so things like the Magit or all the source control stuff would be virtually impossible, or if not very difficult to get in Vim.
In that case, I guess I don't know
just because,
Magit well enough.
Just because,
well, my Git integration in Vim works really well.
Yeah. I found, to be honest, personally, at least on a personal level, that I find Vim script is basically my one big beef with Vim. it's not a very powerful language. I can't do. I found I've used it. I can't get very much out of it. People have, and people do, but then you look at the code and it's absolutely horrendous and not the kind of thing you want to do yourself, at least to my view. So Emacs, the first thing, it's easy to extend. We've got eLisp, which is the programming language that sits behind this, which is a very powerful programming language. It's fairly universally available. I'd argue probably that Vim is probably slightly more so, but again, most Linux distributions have Emacs. You also have the same keybindings that you find in other applications, and you often hear people say that they're using Emacs as their operating system. Something that I found comes quite naturally when you start to use Emacs, and not so much when you're using Vim. I think Emacs very much lends itself to working within it completely. That is partially due to the fact that, due to some downfalls of Emacs, in a sense, in that getting in and out of it takes time, but nevertheless, it is a very powerful piece of software. Cons, the opposite. It's hard to extend in some ways because eLisp, which is incredibly powerful, but it is a language that's very different to possibly the sort of structured programming languages that we're used to. It does take some getting used to. So there is a barrier. There is a barrier to entry. So I guess in a sense, the way to perceive this is that it's easy to extend. It's hard to learn to extend it, but it is easy to extend. Whereas with Vim, I find that, to my experience anyway, it's hard to learn to extend it, and then it's hard to extend as well. It's a little bit heavier, maybe not as universally available, that's debatable. You don't have modal keybindings, whether that's a con or not is also debatable. And it has multi-key bindings rather than modal, which some people disagree with. Again, very subjective. And it is slow to start up, especially with plugins. So we'll talk about the problems with that. So, before I go into too much detail, I want to just quickly review some of the differences and the names that you might come across if you venture into the world of Emacs that might not be what you expect. First, we've got these major and minor modes. So the idea is that I have a file .py if I'm programming in Python, and that when I open that file will open in a major mode, which will be the major mode associated with Python. So this basically is some way of tying some functionality, usually to some file type. This is a Python file I want to open with Python. Then we also have these minor modes that are, so each file has a one-to-one mapping with a major mode. This is a Python file, this is an org file, this is a text file. Minor modes allow us to add functionality, and essentially, for the most part, they're key binding maps, essentially. So I have a major key binding map that defines my Python-related key bindings. So in my Python mode, this key does this. In my other mode, this key does something else. Yeah. And then these are shadowed by several minor modes. So maybe I have a minor mode that does spell checking, or a minor mode that does some other functionality. So with this, we can build up fairly complex types of behavior for specific files, and we can configure it. So we've got there's quite a lot of power just in these two little concepts. The other part, this is just naming, but Emacs is a bit odd with its naming. A frame is the window, as we're used to them. Window is the section. So let me do something. You see these are two what Emacs calls windows on the left and the right. The frame is the whole thing. So if in Vim I did vsplit, name of file, it would split up those two windows. And buffers are then the things that sit inside the window. Right, so you've got this separation that in Vim isn't so apparent. in that I have this object that even when it's not there, I have a buffer that's open. And the window is the thing that displays the buffer. Right? So if you ever venture into Emacs, this is one thing that may trip you up fairly quickly. I find the easiest way to get your head around this is to think of Emacs as an operating system. If you think, hey, Emacs is the operating system, then the concept of Windows actually makes sense. You know, these are things that sit inside my OS, and it maps a little bit more nicely to the concept of Windows we have today. Packages. Emacs has this. Emacs functionality is generally added through packages, so they're the equivalent of the. I don't know if you use uComplete.me or whatever you use in Vim. There's an Emacs equivalent. eLisp is something you'll come across. eLisp is Emacs Lisp. It's a programming language that almost all of Emacs is written in. Now, this is a very nice thing because you can keep digging down. Your Emacs itself is a very, very small Lisp interpreter on which layers of functionality have been layered, all written in a programming language that you can access and change. Right? So this is a very nice thing. This is why people say that Emacs is so configurable, is because essentially all of the editor, or a very, very large part of the editor, is code that you can see and change. Which, unlike Vim, you have to go back, you have to compile, you have to, if you want to really change the editor itself. Now, states I've put in here. States are actually more of a concept of spacemacs, which is the editor I'm showing you now rather than Emacs. So states are what you'd think of as modes. Because the word mode is taken in major and minor modes, spacemacs refers to states as to modes, to Vim modes as states. So you'd have normal state, insert state, visual state. Much in the same way in Vim you'd have normal, insert, and visual modes. One nice thing actually with spacemacs, I should probably point out. I'll give a little bit more of an introduction to spacemacs itself in a second, but it's a way. It's very much geared at Vim users, and it's a way for both Vim to use both Vim and Emacs modes almost seamlessly within the same editor, which is very, very nice. More gotchas. Working directories. Working directories are different. So if I have a working directory if I'm using Vim, I open Vim in a particular directory. If I run any commands, if I do exclamation and type something, that runs something with the current working directory. So if I go exclamation ls, it will run in the current working directory. If I want to change directories, I can cd around and all that sort of stuff. But the directory will never change without me telling it to. Now, Emacs, one thing that's a little bit confusing is the directories are tied to the current buffer. So if I run exclamation mark something, you might say, hang on, this is listing the wrong thing. But as I jump around, Emacs is behind the scenes. You can think of it as changing the current directory, so that when I run a command, it's always running it relative to the current active buffer, if that makes any sense. And the final gotcha, if you're used to control C all the time, this is a really annoying one for Vim users. It's actually control G now. So you've got this little muscle memory that you've always had of control G to get out, C to get out of things, and suddenly you have to use control G. If you ever start using Emacs, you won't believe how many times you type control C. You'll suddenly realise that it's something that happens all the time. So a lot of this, what I'd like to discuss. So I'll quickly mention spacemacs, but I'm going to go into more detail later. So spacemacs is a Vim configuration of Emacs. It's aimed at Vim users. I'll go into detail about what exactly it does, but it does this through the magic of evil mode. Evil mode is something that is a major mode. No, it's a minor mode. Sorry. Evil is a minor mode for Emacs that you can use basically with any file because it's a minor mode, and it basically gives you an almost complete Vim emulation. So pretty much anything I can use in Vim, that I could want to do in Vim, I could do with eagle mode. So I'm going to do a quick demo. I've got this lorem file. I'll open this here. Oh, let's open it full screen. Right. So I've created I put some text in here. And the idea is, if I type W there, I can move forward. So this is just like the kind of Vim emulation that you might have in Eclipse, all these kind of things. So not that impressive, really. The really impressive thing is when you start to get to the things that are more complete. So let's say I want to do between lines 5 and 10, I want to do a normal mode command where I'm going to move forward by 2 words, and then I'm going to delete 3 words. For example, I press enter between lines 5 and, it's quite hard to tell here because it's all...
You did an exclamation mark first.
I did an exclamation mark first, yes I did, thank you. There you go. So, I've run sort of, between lines 5 and 10, I've run a normal mode command. So I've done the equivalent type in two words forward, delete 2 words. So the equivalent of deleting. So pretty much, so I can do that. You can see that those 2 words are actually indeed gone. And pretty much anything you could do in Vim, if you're within a buffer, it will behave exactly, with some very small number of exceptions. I think the S key behaves a little bit differently. But other than that, anything that you do, if I want to do, as I said earlier, vsplit, the current directory, emacs also shows current directories, but if I want to use the Control W to move between 2 windows, or if I want to move by numbers, anything at all within one buffer will work. So go back to so that's for a Vim user. That's very nice. You can just pick this up and fairly quickly get pretty comfortable. Minor differences. Personally, I still use Vim for super large, sort of several gigabyte files, because the way that the movement command is implemented is a little bit better. So if I type, 1000J or 1986J in Emacs, there's a slight delay, whereas in Vim it's impressively instant. So for really large files and really large movements within files, if you ever work with anything like that, Vim does have the edge. Otherwise, from my experience at least, it's very good. It can handle any EX commands, anything. It can handle most things. I mean, any sort of edit here, quit. I'm not going to do them, but anything that you put down there. Quick little emacs Vim macros it handles. So well, I generally tend to use QQ, but whatever you do, whatever way you use to record macros, there are no problems. My small slight gotcha is that macros within a buffer work fantastically well, exactly as you would expect. If you're using macros to jump between several buffers, then the Emacs macros I find are a little bit more powerful. But the Vim macros work the way you'd expect. And as I said, very small difference in keybinding, and this current working directly is different. Also, if you quit, you quit, right? And as we said in the cons of Emacs earlier, it's slow to start. So this is probably the big thing, the big objection that people have is that Emacs is slow to start up. We'll talk about things you can do about that later. Spacemacs. So spacemacs is this editor that is this configuration of Emacs that I'm currently using. So these are what the spacemacs community describe as its 4 pillars. So this is the philosophy around which the configuration is developed. So it's mnemonic and discoverable. So we've got which key, which is this plugin, which will help us to discover the functionality. And this is a really great thing if you're coming from a Vim world and you think there's a lot here under the hood, but I don't know how to find it. So the idea here is that everything is that they've, by default, space is configured as a leader key. So the same way that we have the concept of a leader key in Emacs, we have space configured as the leader key. So if I hit space while I'm in normal mode, I get another key map essentially, where I can type some things and it will narrow me down to some functionality. So for example, if I press space F, it will give me a list of actions around files. If I type space B, it'll give me a list of actions around buffers, and it tells me what they are, at least in the default configuration. If you're happy, once you're happy, you can turn this little pop-up window on and off. But they're nice little training wheels to get us into this Emacs world. So if I want to split the window, it's space window, and then because the text is very large here, normally you'd see lots of these rows next to each other because the text is very large for the presentation. It's not particularly visible, but if you see this split window right, I can hit that, and that will split the windows on the right. So this is really very nice, I think, because everything becomes very discoverable. They're very easy to remember. Space FR is recent files, so files recent. Space buffer. What have we got? Buffer is the list of recent buffers. So there we go. That's my list of recent buffers. So it's very easy to find things, and it's more to the point. They're very easy to remember. And you would not believe the amount of functionality that I have hidden inside of here. Major mode bindings generally are attached to a comma as a major mode leader. And we've also got this helm, so I can helm the space will give me a list of all the commands that I could possibly, all the functions that I could possibly call that would do something. So if I know I'll go into more detail on some of these later, but if I want to look recent F, oh look, there's quite a few here. Helm, there we go, helm recent F. I know that there's a command with a given name. I can search for it. I can type a couple of words in. It'll automatically filter them down, and I can dig through the things that might be promising. And then here alongside the name of the command, I've got, it's telling me the keybindings. So space FR is the recent files. Space PR is a narrowing of the recent files to the current project, etc., etc. We've also got really extensive, it's discoverable, we've got this really extensive help system. So I could press space help, space H, which is the container for all of my help functionality. And in there I could look for help on functions. And these are the functions that make up my environment. So as well as the plugins, this is actually as if I was looking inside of Vim's source code and digging out some functions. Let's see if we can do that. It's sort of, power line. Hang on. Where am I? Help. Help describe. Sorry, functions. Here we go. So recent F. We've been playing a lot with that. So recent F, and let's go for the projectile version. Helm projectile recent F. So press and I click on that, and now I've got a description of the source code that contains this function.
Because this is not documented.
Yes, very good. That's a very good choice, actually, isn't it? Generally, it's pretty good with the documentation, but just the fact that I can go and dig now down to some function inside of the core of my editor and look at it. I can go here, and there we go, this is where the function, recent f, where is it gone? I can see inside the source code where all this the Helm functionality is contained. If I want, I can redefine all of these. I can change the behavior. I can completely change the behavior of my editor in pretty much any way that I want.
Without restarting?
Without restarting it. Because all of this is
Interpreted.
Yeah, all of this is interpreted. So I can redefine these functions. The next time they get called, it'll be the function that I've just redefined. This is one thing about Emacs and eList, but it lives in a fairly global space, which is nice. It's obviously considered to be bad from a programmer's point of view to have so many things accessible globally, but from a configuration point of view, it's sort of neat because I can go and I can redefine a function. It lives in the same namespace that I'm currently in, with some small exceptions, and it can be a very powerful thing. So we can dig down quite easily. It's very discoverable. But yeah, I can see the major mode bindings with this space question. Again, I've got this Helm thing, so I can go, or if I've got something, or I know I want something to do with org, and I know I want something to do with agenda, and I can find these. I can cycle through these, and I can see, okay, in this major mode, that's bound to these kind of commands, which is sort of nice. It's consistent. So in our context, I think consistent means that as a Vim user, we consistently get the sort of H, J, K, and L keys do what we expect. You see a list of keys down here. These keys you can expect pretty much in any mode will behave as a Vim user. So if you're going for something particularly fancy, and sometimes Emacs has all of its own key bindings to do all sorts of stuff. The way that this is handled is that these keys are enforced, and the keys that they would have shadowed are moved in some systematic manner to somewhere else. So it's first. No, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it either moves to control or capital first, and then on to control, etc. Sometimes this is a little bit hairy because sometimes you do stumble across little corners of functionality where things aren't quite completely Vimified, as it were. But on the whole, it's very good. And the fourth in this case, pillar of spacemacs it's crowd configured. So I don't really have to know any eLisp to start digging into this. Everything's configured in a layer system. So we take the base distribution and we add layers on top of it that modify the functionality. If you want to write something for yourself, you can either write it inside your configuration file, or you can write it inside a layer that you can then distribute to other people, and they can implement these functionalities that you contained within your layer on their distribution, on their machine. Okay, so quickly some comments. It's slow. I'll come back to Emacs client in a second. It's great for pair programming because I can quickly switch between Emacs and Vim mode with Control-Z. If you're not interested in Emacs mode at all, that's great, you don't have to use it. But if you use Control-Z, you can see in this corner this changes colour, indicating that I'm going from one mode to the next. If you ever find that your keys don't work, and this is why this bit's worth mentioning, if you ever find that your keys don't work, if you look down here and see a little blue colour, it's probably because you at some point pressed Control-Z by accident and ended up in Emacs mode, and everything is suddenly new and confusing. So you can always press Control-Z to toggle back.
So it seems like they kept Control-Z as a dangerous button.
Yes.
Because in shell that's background, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in Vim, I've had friends who've sort of, I use Control-A and Control-X quite often to sort of increase and decrease numbers in Vim. A friend of mine once told me, I never use Control-X, it's too close to Control-Z. And if I ever touch Control-Z, it's just disappeared. And I didn't know that there's a foreground background.
Yeah, I mean, for for people from a Windows background as well, it's a fairly unfortunate choice, really. That's anyway. If you're using a proxy for the internet, you need to set your proxy variable. So if you're using, for example, our cluster, you need to set the proxy, HTTP proxy environment variable to be able to call out. And Emacs works, it does work really well, pretty much as you see it here, with it won't display inline images and things like that, obviously, if you're a command line. But a command line, it's as long as you set up your term variable so that it knows that it has colours at its disposal, it's pretty good. It's really is pretty good. It does have some issues though. As we said, it's very slow to start up. That is the really big thing. So we've got two options. We can either use this Emacs client, which is a little script you can set up, what you do is in Emacs you say you run a start server command, and now that runs as a daemon, and then the Emacs client, rather than starting a new instance of Emacs, will connect to the existing instance. So from command line, I type something like Emacs client with some options, which I'd usually have as an alias, and then that would know that rather than opening Emacs, it's going to go off to my Emacs client. I can get that actually as well to, you can add some options to fall back to Vim. So if you're interested in Vim, you could set this up so that if it can't find an open Emacs client, it then uses Vim. So that's one option. I think most Emacs users, after using it for a while, probably go for the option of just don't shut it down, because it's a little bit slow to start up, and I have to admit that spacemacs itself is even slower because it does have a lot of functionality that it's loading in when it's starting up. Especially when you start configuring and adding layers and doing all this sort of stuff. I might actually just stop and start again in a sec, so you can have a look at that. But generally, you can get away with quite a lot without shutting down. I can have a terminal emulator in here, which behaves pretty much like a terminal emulator is supposed to. On top of that, I've got all of my Vim movement commands just baked in, because I'm in Emacs, and Emacs has implemented evil mode, so everything just works. So if I want to change till F and then put something else in, I can do things like that. I'll talk a little bit more about the various. There are some different options with the terminal, so I'll talk about those in a second. You do find sometimes, I find sometimes with these terminal, terminal commands in spacemac, it does sometimes get a little bit confused about where the editable and not editable text is. That's the only little downside. Is sometimes if you go back to the start of a line, it gets a bit confusing. It goes right back to the start before the prompt, which is not great. That sort of stuff's very much getting better. But I'll talk about a few options with the shell. If you're a Windows user, however, it is a little bit limited in a way, because when you open your shell, you're going to get your Windows command line, which may or may not be what you're used to. If that's what you're used to, great, then you have all the power that you previously had. The other quite nice thing is this eShell shell, which I can open up actually. Where have we gone? First time it might take a little while. Right, so there we go. This is basically a command line implemented in eLisp. So if I'm on a Windows machine, I can have something that fairly closely resembles at least the commands that I'm used to a Linux machine. These are. It's not like for like, and it's not intended to be. It has a lot of power that it's an alternative command line. It's a REPL, just like the shell that we're used to. It binds to the basic commands. It has a lot of power in that now I can start. I can call emacs functions. So I can call functions of the editor from here, which opens up a whole new possibility for you. So for example, I could say find file lorem. Find file is the internal function inside of the editor that finds and opens files, and then it will. Hang on. Find. Sorry, I can't type. File, and it will open it in the editor because we're within this sort of zone where the editor and the command line are one and the same thing. The command line is running now inside of the editor properly. You can see all of the functions that are exposed, and it's all in, and I can change them. So it is nice. It does have a learning curve because it's not Bash. So the way that you do loops and the way that you do some control structures are a little bit different. But that's one. So that's one way of doing things. If you're in Windows, so you can get some of the functionality. It's nice because you don't need to install Cygwin, you don't need to do all these things to have some semblance of a shell in Windows. The alternative is use Cygwin, or you could use what I do, which is, well, actually I do both. I use eShell a lot, but I also use Emacs within the Linux subsystem that you can get with Windows 10. So then all of the commands that you get, all of the shell commands that you run.
Do you need X11 to do that?
No, you don't. If you want the GUI version, then you can install a Windows X11 server. And then
we're running Windows subsystem and Linux upstairs quite a lot, so that would also be a way to go for us. I haven't experimented with X11 on it.
It's dead easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's dead easy. You just install because the subsystem and Windows are both fundamentally on the same machine. They see the same network. Mm-hmm. So if you just point them both at localhost, done. It's not much. It's not very difficult. If not, I mean, you can use Emacs from command line. It's pretty good. It depends how much of the functionality you use. If you use things like inline images and PDF viewing and all that sort of stuff, then obviously you'll be a bit of a limit if you just use the command line. But otherwise, if what you're doing is fundamentally manipulating text, it's pretty good. So that's that. So Helm is this thing that you've seen down here that pops up all the time. So basically the idea of this is a very powerful feature of Emacs, or package for Emacs, and it's very heavily integrated into spacemacs. And the idea here is that any filterable list, any list of things or list of options that I would normally have displayed to me is filtered with this sort of fuzzy searching, all this kind of nice stuff. Let's see, run shell. I can look through things like that. So, for example, I could do space / and that's a smart search. So that will look current directory. It'll search for. It'll search in all of the files. Let's look for lorem because I know it's there. So I can say, okay, it's there. If there was a subdirectory tree, it would search for all the subdirectory tree. You can configure this to use lots of different searches, so grep or AG or ACK or whatever you want. I can go to the file, or I can perform any action on this. So if I press Control Z, it gives me a list of actions that I can perform with the file. So, or a list of actions that I can perform with that filtered thing. So yeah, it's a very powerful way of filtering lists, and it does become very central to the way that things are done. there's lots of functions that have been that can use Helm. Swoop is quite a nice one. I might quickly demonstrate on if I've got anything. Demonstrating Swoop. Should we go for that? Yeah, okay. So if I want to look in here, I can type space SS, and I'm now in Helm Swoop. So if I want to look for iFort, it's going to tell me all of the instances of iFort that I've got here. I want to search for colon. I mean, there's just because that's going to be one that it'll definitely find in the make file. I can search through my file. So there's lots of these kind of functionalities that you can vary that are just there, and basically, you play with this space and S for search, F for file, B for buffer, and you start seeing things that are interesting, and you start experimenting with them, and it's fairly easy to discover what can and can't be done. Projectile, I'm just going to list through a couple of interesting little packages that are part of spacemacs. So projectile is gives it some understanding of what a project is based on either some kind of version control system that it detects, or you manually putting this .projectile file in. Because this is partially a solution, if you're a Vim user, you might think that's not very useful because you're used to your system staying in the same directory. So in a sense, this is partially a solution to that. So my directories, every file that I'm in my directory moves around relative to the file. So projectile gives me a way of having a central, to be able to also say, well, this is the current file, this is also the root of the directory. So I can do searching relative to the root of the directory as well as relative to the current file, for example, or the current directory, does that make sense?
So it's current project.
Yeah, it's just the idea of projects. We got the idea of projects. Org mode is actually, I'm in, you may not realise it, but I'm in org mode now. I'll go into the presentation view that I've got. And basically it's this structured editing, where you can edit things in a structured way, you can move headings around. It's a nice way of doing things. Now I'm going to have to some other stuff. Magit, I can talk about these things a little bit more if you want, but Magit is one of the main reasons to use emacs, spacemacs or emacs over Vim. It's an incredible, I think, porcelain for Git. I really like it. Obviously, if you have something that works for you, then that's great. Tramp is really very useful. So with Tramp, I hope I've got my SSH config set up properly. But in my SSH config, I've got a server called GitLab, so I can edit things directly on the server. There we go. I've got the file. I can go looking. This is probably database. So I could go into around. I can open. No, don't do that. I could. There you go. I've got the file there. This is the file on the remote server. Next to it, I could open the file locally. I could have a directory remotely and a directory locally open, and I can copy files between them, and it will seamlessly do that. So it is. It is very powerful in that if you're working with multiple systems, rather than with Vim, I have to SSH in, I have to open Vim, I have to do stuff. With this, my Tramp translates my paths using. Well, if you look at the top left, you see this SCP, which is a protocol, hostname, and that could be a hostname from my SSH config, or it could be a hostname from, it could be the actual hostname, and then some path. And I can, any file, if I wanted to do, vsplit, and then I put a complete qualifier of a file, including server and protocol with which I want to access it, it will just open the file in the current editor window, which I think is very nice. The other nice thing is, so it can be a bit a bit convoluted, but there's these things called bookmarks that you can use, so you could bookmark a file, which is my brain's gone blank. Well, this is a good demonstration. My brain's gone blank, so I can't remember. So I'm going to type space bookmark, bookmark set, bookmark jump. There we go. Bookmark helm, I think, helm bookmarks. There we go. So I can enter a bookmark name, and this will be saved in my bookmarks, and when I go back here, there'll be a list with that bookmark name, and I can just say, go here, and it will go to the right server, in the right directory, open the right file. So it's completely seamless over which I think is, well, if you work with multiple systems, is really great. Let's go back here. Tramp's good. ediff is the alternative to if you use vimdiff a lot. ediff is the emacs equivalent. It took me a little, when I first started using it, I thought I really miss vimdiff, but it's a slightly different way of thinking. It's actually equally, if not more powerful, I would say. Ace jump is a nice way of jump. Ace jump is neat. If I go jump, and I look at a letter on my key, I just say A, and it'll say KJ. I think there's equivalent things in there.
Easy motion.
Easy motion, yeah. It's easy motion, but it works for Windows. It works for lots of, you've got words or something, whatever. We can run terminals inside of Emacs, and there's 3 types of terminal you could possibly want to run. One is ANSI term, which is basically a terminal window inside of Emacs. You can copy things to it and from it. You can go into normal mode, but the characters you type are not sent until you press enter. So it's a dumb terminal. Yeah, so you can't open things like top, or you can't open any cursors. So that's no, hang on, the other way around. You can't open things with top, you can't open cursors. Sorry, I've got these the wrong way around. The shell is the dumb terminal. So the shell is, I write, I press enter. Whatever I've written and edited and done all the stuff to gets sent off to my shell, and it comes back. Yeah. So I can't do cursors, I can't do top. ANSI term is sort of the answer to that, in that I get the type of terminal that we expect. So it's more the sort of thing that you'd be used to with all the bells and whistles, but you are limited in that editing things doesn't work so well in Emacs. In spacemacs, actually, it's not so bad because we've got normal mode that we can jump out of. So we can still use normal mode to jump out and do things. We just can't use any sort of control prefixed vim commands and sort of expect them to work as we would expect them to work. They might work. They would probably work in the way that the shell would use them. And then there's eShell, which is the thing I described earlier. So I think that's the end. If anyone wants me to demonstrate anything in particular, I can walk through some specifics.